correctly again and see if that works out. And if it doesn't, let me know. Everything looking good?
Yes, looks good.
Great. I think so. Yeah, so I got a quick note from Nicole and Paul about coming in to have a conversation with the group, talk about some things that we've been seeing, and we laid out a couple different topics that have grown in popularity around not just the customers that we've been working with, but just in general conversations that executives have been presenting to us in regards to being successful with change and analytics. And so this topic around change enablement kind of caught the attention, and it's trending a whole lot. And what I'd like to do today is kind of talk a little bit about who Pandata is and why it's relevant to what we talk about. Essentially go through that conversation of failure data is everywhere, right? And why is it that it's not always just related to technology? At the end of the day, it's really related to culture. It's about people. The IT side has become kind of that easy button aspect of it. So then we get into, for us, we call it change enablement. And what is the difference between change management and change enablement? And then we talk a little bit about also embedding change enablement into a lot of our processes and our approach to projects. So some of you are going to get a little bit of exposure to our intellectual property, if you want to call it that. But it's essentially important to the success of our clients. And then we go through some 4 or 5 common steps, right? And that's establishing a team, choosing the right stakeholders, measuring and monitoring success, or basically creating a better plan. And then what your communication is going to look like after that. So a little bit about Pandata Group. Pandata Group is really about building data-driven communities. That's the end game for us. So we do a lot of work when it comes to putting data platforms together, migrating to the cloud, doing a lot of analytic works. That's all wonderful, and that's a big part of what we do. But at the end of the day, we're really about putting a journey together on being modern, being innovative, and creating the right data culture. So what has that meant for us? We're a 7-year-old company. We started in 2014, and here's the 3 things that we used to, that we're always seeing, right? It's this interconnected interactions, right? And it really starts with empowering people, right? Every project that we do is about a business objective. It's about a business goal. And that's about empowering people to be more strategic, to be tactical, to be better at operations, right? To put something in sight to making a difference to that organization. But we also see that there are governed processes that need to be in place. We're looking to improve things. We're looking to create these processes. And then obviously there's technology, and that, like I was saying before, has become the easy button of it all. And you really spend more time and emphasis on the right process, the right approach, and then actually, what does that mean for the people side of it? So when we look at a lot of things like transformation, or just implementing new greenfield projects, you're talking to organizations that are going to be exposed to new technology no matter what, and it's there to help people. So what do we do to make that happen? And that's where we're going to talk a little bit more, that it goes beyond IT. It gets back into that people side of it, the behavior and the culture side of it. So obviously we're really good at deploying modern data architectures. The big background for us is that we're a Snowflake partner, and we've built an ecosystem around that. And it goes from data ingestion to processing within Snowflake, and then leveraging augmented analytics and data science. And that's where the user community really gets involved. And that's where a lot of change happens, and the mindset happens. And that's where a lot of today's conversation will probably have more emphasis than really the back end data side of it. So again, the highlight is that we're trying to create these communities. We're trying to tap into organizations that talk about being data driven or talk about being decision focused, right? How do you get there? Well, the technology is just a little bit of that. So
I had a question back there on when
yeah.
I saw the cross-disciplinary approach. When you say that, could you dive into a little bit more what disciplines you're seeing? Different
Yeah,
disciplines?
So when we look at a cross-disciplinary approach, obviously for us, a focus is customer success. It's a great experience. It's not just getting budget. It's not just meeting things on time. It's that the user is really happy with things. We can go back in a few months and say, how are things improved for you? And we do that in three different ways. We have a cross-disciplinary approach with consulting, right? So that's bringing in advisory services. That's bringing in assessments. That's bringing in change enablement or change management. We have technical expertise and accelerators. That goes into our implementation programs, right? Especially with organizations looking to migrate to the cloud or create a new data platform. We have accelerators in place that make that happen really rapidly. So it's not like a 6-month program anymore. It's about 10 to 12 weeks to get that going. And then the third piece, again, is providing change enablement for data transformation, right? It's really about putting the exercises in place that bring the people into that entire process so that IT and business isn't working really in silos. They're really working and integrated. And it's not really IT delivering a project to the business anymore. It's really IT being a business partner. And instead of being a house of no, they're being a house of yes. And then the business really saying, this is kind of our baby. And for us, that's provided a great, we basically been about 100% on time for all of our projects. We've got a great customer rating, and we're really empowered by that.
Nice, thanks.
So let's talk about projects, right, in the world. I think that if you're not in the data and analytics world, if you are in the data and analytics world, right, you've seen that quote of 85% of data projects fail or analytics projects fails. And I think this slide kind of represents, guess what? There's failure data all over the place. It's sort of like, why are we in IT at the end of the day? You get to talk about failure for ERP projects. We hear that McKinsey, 30% of organizations really find success in their digital transformation. And digital transformation has a lot to do with data and analytic adoption. And then we get into learning about Gartner and what they want to go through or what they're finding in their reports that, through 2022, only 20% of analytic insights will deliver business outcomes. So are we going through this whole approach of, implementing IT and technology to be really trendy and cool? Or are we really talking about changing the mindset, changing the culture, and getting people more ingrained? It's a lot of hit and miss, right? When you look at these numbers and you look at these stats, you have to wonder why some of this is occurring. But that's pretty significant when you're seeing a survey of executives and you're getting a mindset that maybe things were on time, maybe projects were executed in budget, but if the business isn't adopting it and they're not gravitating to promote whatever happened within them, it's not successful, right? So we get back into that piece of the people is an integral part of any successful program or project or next phase in life, right? And so that's when it's becoming this idea of how do we embed
We had
change
a
in it?
I had a thought, and some people were asking in the chat back on the previous slide. The third point, what do you think they mean at Gartner when they say only 20% of analytics insights will deliver business outcomes? Like,
I go back to the idea of have we really been working alongside the business to see that we want to get a 20% reduction in the process, right? We want to see this insight faster than we could before.
okay,
Um, things like that. Is there some sort of ownership coming from the business side saying that we've been a part of this whole process, right? And can
yeah,
say that we're truly seeing, I can truly see my data, or I can see the insight I need much faster than I could through my Excel spreadsheets in the past, right? By piecing them all together. Um, or have we been going the last 4 or 5 years on this trend of just implementing big data because, Hadoop sounded awesome. And the next step is that cloud's going to sound really cool, right? There's a lot of promises. And that could be, so we're asking for budget, we're asking for all these promises, but are we really lining ourselves up with what we want to do from an analytics and data analytics perspective to a business outcome? Are we getting ourselves executive buy-in because
okay,
we're saying, hey, Mr. Supply Chain VP, right? You've got some challenges. How can we make this better, right?
Sure.
Um,
Is is that point in conflict with the second point, which seems to be saying 70% result in some sort of improved corporate performance?
it could, but I mean, that's where digital transformation has kind of an ambiguous term, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
look at digital transformation, which projects is McKinsey really referring to? Is it the data? Is it the mobile? Is it the analytics, right? Um, you know, that's where I think that report could have probably dove into that a little bit more. But you kind of wonder if a lot of these initiatives are really tied to data and analytics, then maybe all the data analytics project, maybe the data and the analytic projects really did kind of go back to that 85% failure rate, right? Um,
Sure.
so it's a lot of question marks. They don't dive into that enough. Um, so it's just kind of interesting to see those trends.
Yep. Thanks. There's a good comment in the chat about those guys pushing a square-wheeled wagon, too busy to come to the improvement and digital transformation group with the round wheel.
Yes, you got it. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
Thanks.
Um, so throughout this discussion, you're going to hear me kind of intermittently use a lot of different words, right? So I'm going to use initiative, modernization, transformation, projects, et cetera. And really just so that we're limiting any confusion, they're all referring to the same thing, okay? And that's really the implementation of some sort of cloud-based analytics architecture, because that's where we're seeing this new trend going, and that's where we really want to talk about bringing things together cohesively. Um, I wanted to share an illustration of a typically we share with our clients that talks about the steps that we take with the adoption of data and analytics transformation, okay? So for a lot of that, it's really about a couple phases, and we're putting the foundation in and helping organizations execute a proof of concept, identify the right use cases, build out that roadmap, start moving to the cloud. The second phase is really getting into the full deployment, like confirming that architecture, making sure that it has the right environment around it, identifying the roles and processes, especially with organizations that are new to this space and building a team, or maybe reimagining their team. How does that role change? What are new roles that need to be added, right? And that can be both from the IT side to the business side. It just depends on what sort of strategy they're creating, whether it's centralized or decentralized. So a lot of questions come in, but that goes into that second phase, right? And the third piece of it is really strengthening that community. It's building up that data community and then reinforcing it and building it. And that's where a lot of the continuous learning comes in, the introduction to data literacy. This is really where we really want to talk to organization development leaders about how do you build in the requirements of the type of data that someone's going to work with day in and day out, and where is it? How's it going to impact their job, right? And how do you make sure that they understand that, especially if they're new to the organization? So these are kind of the new things that we're talking about. Um, so what's really kind of been working its way out, especially over the last, I would say, 12 months, 18 months, is change enablement. So we typically kind of look at change enablement that's part of a data transformation initiative based on the Snowflake Data Cloud and its ecosystem of partners. And that could be Matillion to Data IQ to Data Robot, right? There's all these new technologies that are being introduced, but there's also new concepts being introduced to these organizations. And that means new architectures. What do you keep hearing about the data lake, the data warehouse, the lake house? Whether it's going to be streaming architecture, whether it's a batch architecture, micro batch architecture, there are these new concepts behind just the architecture, but also software development lifecycle changes, right? We hear about DevOps, data ops, data SecOps. What's going on with all these things, and how does it change our relationship with moving these projects forward? Again, how does data governance play in? I mean, we have all these great topics during these user groups, and we touch on them, but they all have a big piece in this change. And even with a lot of companies that we're working with, where teams have been there for 12 years or 10 years, even little things like requirements gathering and documentation are a lot different, because if you have a tool like ThoughtSpot, it's going to be a lot different than working with a tool like Crystal Reports or Business Objects or even SSRS, right? you're going to approach designing reports or opening things up to your end users a lot differently. So we definitely look at that, meaning there's going to be a lot of change in a short time frame, because again, when we look at these phases and we're trying to execute a project that means getting a quick return on that data, we're looking at putting these things together in a couple months, not a year or two, right? So that means there's going to be a lot thrown out, a lot of different organizations, a lot of profiles, different people in their groups, and it impacts employees, partners, and customers. And so we want to encourage change enablement activities from the very beginning to not only avoid common pitfalls of cost overruns or employee disengagement, um, but also we want to get that executive buy-in. We need to help them understand that things are a lot different. We need to help them understand that this story of you're going to get your money back within 2 months or 3 months isn't necessarily what they should always focus on. It should really focus on, how is this going to change the experience of your employees? How is it going to change the experience of your partner network that might actually impact business a little bit differently? So
It's an interesting point, because in the chat they said, ROI is the most asked question, right? But I just heard you say trying to make this quick, small, so that the investment isn't so costly. Try to limit that as a focus of their attention. Like, we need to understand the ROI seems to be a thing you're saying, like trying to limit that not
yeah,
being the entire focus
move away from that a little bit,
okay.
right? So
Yep.
ROI is always going to be around, TCO is always going to be around. Otherwise, Gartner and Forrester and all them would go out of business for a little bit. But there's a mindset change where we have to talk a little bit more about, look at what we do day in and day out. Look at how disgruntled your employees could get with this process that you have, and how could something as streamlined as how we ingest data differently change that and make that process easier and get you more insight? Loved last week that I was with a client where a director spoke to one of his peers and said, when we go to the executive leadership board, don't worry about the ROI conversation. Focus more on the exact process we're trying to improve. And then that will inherently kind of move into an ROI conversation later, because sometimes you can't always put a dollar value to every little piece that you're moving around in an organization. You would like to, but you just sometimes can't. So it's more or less talking a little bit about, um, what are you doing to make people happier at the end of the day? How do you make someone's life just a smidge easier than it was yesterday? And that's where we kind of get into this preparation of speaking with different user groups, right? So you've got the executive leadership, you've got individuals that work just on the program side itself, regular day-to-day managers and employees. And then you get to this phase of, and you want to enable them, and then you get into the reinforcement aspect of it all and making sure that they're happy, they're getting messaging about how much we've improved, and everyone within the organization is seeing that. Um, so that's really kind of what we've been taking as the most common steps as we engage our clients, and they're looking at these new changes of moving to the cloud, looking at the new way that data is ingested and brought in, and you know, there's a lower barrier to entry to get into data and analytics than there was 5 or 6 years ago. So if you really want to build that into your ROI, fine, you can. But I really think it's about different pieces of putting the people together and helping them make decisions that they couldn't make as quickly as they could in the past.
that
And we've been
reinforcement
seeing,
that reinforcement piece is so important, but it seems like it can just so easily be let go and people are onto the new shiny thing. What's your experience about trying to really get that reinforcement phase to occur? Have you had lots of successes, or is it getting better? What would you say about it?
it's ongoing. It's definitely ongoing, right? And that kind of gets into a couple of the slides that we have in the future here, just a little bit, Paul, that
Sure,
talks
sure.
really about, how do you monitor and measure that, right? How do you set the right standards of success? What tools are you using to get into that? So that's where you kind of you've got to be if something you've got to not get relaxed on, okay? Because the second you start letting go of that, then suddenly everyone gets a little bit lazier, right? So the reinforcement piece is something that when we look at our clients, we'll get them through the enablement piece. The reinforcement piece is when yeah, you could hire a group like us and we'll be the ones that take that charge, but it is really someone within the organization that has to become a change champion to own that and go back to it, take the lumps and bruises with it, but encourage everything and create the right sort of programs that make that happen. Um, so why does it matter, right? Um, Successful projects really for us, we've been doing a really great job on time and on budget and getting things within a time frame that everyone expects. But really for us, our most success has been yielding delighted, productive users who realize the expected benefits, right? We try to go through a discovery exercise with them ahead of the game to root out, like in a perfect world, what would you be able to do if we put this together correctly, right? And that is what we focus our time on. So we know the technology is going to work. We're not really hung up on servers failing us or anything like that. You know, I'm going to call out Snowflake for going down for a couple hours a couple weeks ago, but that's on them, right? That has absolutely nothing to do with us. But it's one less worry that we really have to focus on. So in the past, in the past, I mean, like again, 5 to 8 years ago, when we were implementing data warehouses with hardware or putting data lakes in on Hadoop-based systems, you know, you could spend about 15% to 20% of your time on change enablement because you really had to focus a lot on making sure that things were integrated and working. The cloud really allows you to spend less time on that, and you can shift 50 to 60% of your time on change enablement activities and really ensuring adoption is working because it's really a lot easier to integrate systems. It's really a lot easier to stand things up. And so these are sort of the value points that you can really execute behind change enablement, right? Um, you're going to get better user performance. You're going to get project success because instead of just meeting a timeline, again, you're getting Bob at the executive level saying, I've never got a report this fast in my entire life. This is fantastic. It used to take 3 hours. It's 5 seconds. It's 5 minutes. For Bob, it could be 30 minutes after 3 hours, right? And just he'd be excited. So you change a lot of the focus from simply being on the technology to the actual employees, the individuals that want to give that buy-in, that want to say, I'm ready to go, let's make this successful, and then make a really smooth transition for them. Um, and again, you're minimizing a lot of risk, right? So when you're putting the person in focus, if you're putting that group in focus, and you're really bringing them into a different engagement sphere, you're going to minimize that risk because they understand what's happening. They're there to validate things with you. They're making it happen with you. And so suddenly your costs are kind of decreasing at the end of the day, right? We really haven't had a project overrun in 16 months. So for us and our customers, there are no project cost overruns. And that's a really, really positive thing for not just my company and my team, but also our clients and our clients, positioned in front of their management team when they recommended us. So a common thing, right? Isn't this change management? Yes and no, right? Change management is often related to a bigger spectrum, right? There's a lot of organizations that look at this big, gigantic organizational change management process, and I believe I read a report from McKinsey again back a long time ago that larger enterprises go through an org change like every 7 years, right? So as soon as people are getting settled in, there's another change to it. It's part of a bigger picture. So we take a look at change enablement being a little bit different. So organizational change enablement, it's a process of preparing the business and its people for an implementation of new capabilities. So especially when we're talking about modernizing data and analytics and going through the transformation of new technologies, we're providing a smaller subset of a group to do their job differently and to enhance performance and to provide better results, right? Um, why do we use change management instead, change enablement instead of change management? It's really simple. It's because we're not managing change. We're enabling the organization. We're enabling their people to adapt to their work a little bit differently and their behavior a little bit differently and to adopt new ways of working. Um, we don't really want to come in with this mindset that we're going to control you, right? Because management automatically provides that idea that someone's here to micromanage me. So we're really here to help you take advantage of these new systems, these new approaches, and leverage it for your job, right? And sure, there's going to be a lot of end user training, but it's going back to saying, what can we do different than what you do today? And it kind of starts with that. It's defining efficient ways of working. It's proving the value to your people. It's doing something that's really kind of tight and packed and concise, and then showing that this is going to work for kind of your next user group and the next user group. And again, strengthening that community because everyone's talking and working together about it.
I have a bit of a question around the distinction here for change enablement versus change management, and the piece,
Sure.
therefore, everyone shares a mutual responsibility for that change. Some of what I wonder about is the tragedy of the commons. Everyone shares the mutual responsibility, so that means nobody really does. Talk a bit about that.
Well, I think that goes back into having, yeah, I like that approach, Paul. I see your point on that conversation point. Um, but I do believe that it's more or less kind of it's that idea of uh, if you don't know me right now, everything in my life, I've got something that's very soccer focused, right? So when I take a look at a game plan and we look at a soccer analogy, okay, you cannot have a single individual that's really good at that on that team and expect that that team's just going to win games, okay? That's not going to happen. Kind of cracks me up with Aaron Rodgers. You know, it's this idea that he's not going to just going to make everything happen. Soccer is a sport where you need to have everyone working to the best of your ability, right? You have a responsibility for your one little role and you know your position, you know what you have to do, and the person to your right and to your left understands that as well. You do not have to be, a five-star player on that field to win games in soccer. You can have an entire team of like three-star athletes and be very, very successful as long as everyone communicates and understands their strengths or weaknesses. And so that's where I think when we go into change enablement, it's that same sort of mindset and that same sort of approach. So it goes back into your communication strategy behind everything, where you sort of say, here's what I think is going to be great about this, but I'm concerned about this, right? And if you've got the right group around you that creates a supportive kind of structure, you're going to be successful. It's just about that communication planning, which is really, really imperative when you go through any sort of change program uh, at all, right?
Yeah,
If you don't have communication and you don't have details, you will fail,
yeah.
period.
I'd rewrite that line for me and to try and help with change enablement to say something that is everyone knows their responsibilities and their team's responsibilities for that change.
Yeah, I
You know,
like that. I'm going to change it tonight after the meeting. I like that a whole lot.
because
That's
I
a good
think
one.
that's another way to say what you said, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
no other questions in the chat so far, other than people clapping and you owe me a beer or something.
So Panda Group approach is successful adoption, right? Our framework for this is basically loosely adopted off of a combination of industry best practices, right? So, me personally, I'm not going to take any credit for being a change management expert or anything like that. It's individuals within an organization that adopt these pieces. So if you're familiar or not familiar with some of these frameworks, they come from the ACMP, which is the Association of Change Management Professionals, um, and the PROCI methodology. And basically, there are ways to maximize their adoption. Um, and for us, we've taken a framework that breaks it down into three different phases, right? And we basically engage our customers. In this manner because a lot of them have some sort of change management structure in place. So again, we talk a lot more just about the enablement pieces, and we break enablement down into preparation, enablement, which is really just kind of like the communications training, reinforcement planning, and then the reinforcement of it. So I think, Paul, you're asking like, how do you do the reinforcement side? Um, so again, it's kind of that ongoing support, it's training, it's providing the right tools around it. And we talk about that in the next 5 steps here. So we kind of talk about 5 steps. What does this look like to kind of roll this out from a high level perspective? All right. Any questions here, Paul, or can I move forward?
I'd say there's one that, so are you going to get into an example that shows an outcome of this with an enterprise, maybe a before or after type of anything coming on that?
I
Otherwise,
don't have a slide that talks about that or calls that out outright, but we could definitely have a
okay,
conversation of things that we've
sure,
seen and at kind of when you get to the roundtable part, if that makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah.
I appreciate that though. So yeah, again, first step, it's really establishing a change enablement team, right? And this is where you kind of get the deep rooted change management pieces kicking in, just a semblance of it, right? But you need to have an executive sponsor. So for us, on every single engagement that we're going into, we have some sort of executive sponsor, whether that's a CIO, finance manager, executive leader of some sort. And so they're the ones that are there to define the vision and the purpose and the direction. All right. It goes back to that alignment. There's always going to be an organizational alignment of some sort, but this is where you have to change the expectation from the executive side to move beyond here's our ROI, right? To really say, how does this goal really tie back to what the company wants to do in the next 2 years, right? Or 6 months or something like that. So you can kind of get that smart analogy put in place, right? Something that's measurable, something that's in the timeline, has a value to it, and can be quick, right? So a lot of times we go in right away and ask, who is the executive sponsor? That's not old news, but this is what makes things really successful is when that person is behind it and really driving a lot of that communication, and they're part of the communication plan and strategy. You then look for someone that wants to be the change enablement lead. This is someone that typically can be from the outside, like my company, or from an internal role, but especially for a project, they're going to lead the day-to-day activities, plans, everything like that. Okay, whether that's internal, external, they're going to run that. So if it's going to be for a project to kind of introduce this concept and where it's going to go in the future, I recommend working with an outside party and then having someone that could maybe shadow them and adopt that same sort of methodology and approach. We provide a lot of templates and communication plans and things like that that could be used. Some customers want to take it, some they don't. It's up to them, really. It leads right into the person that's going to be the communication lead, right? They this is marketing, right? If you've got someone in your marketing department that kind of handles the internal communication plan, if you can loop them in to create something that's kind of exciting, builds excitement for everybody, it's not uncommon to see someone in the marketing department join that team. It's important to find a training lead. They're the ones that kind of incorporate whether it's internal training, whether it's support training from technology partners who want to also work with the change enablement side of everything. Um, you've got to put someone in place that can put those activities and actions together. Oftentimes, that's an external role. That's something that we do a whole lot, and we bring in like Snowflake and ThoughtSpot and Matillion, who have training support for our clients and put them through a number of workshops as they're getting through the first project and learning things. And then we basically have videos and everything available for them later on to tap into to reinforce that learning. The last sort of role is really that change champion. Um, the change champion is going to take the lumps and bumps and all the bruises. They have to be the person that provides the feedback about the activities. They have to be the person that really facilitates the adoption. It's going to be an ongoing piece of life for them from that project, if they're engaged with us, to after that project to keep it going, right? So they're the ones that often have to deal with some of the more challenging personas within a group. And they have to have, basically, I'm going to buy you basically a case of beer at the end of every project, right? Because they're going to go through a lot, unless they have a team that's really, really open to change. But if you've got a team that's a little resistant, right? They're the individuals that are going to have to kind of deal with that and get ready for that just a little bit. It's okay. It's part of the part of the gig. Um, so in order to get ready for that, right, especially for that change champion, you got to conduct some sort of change readiness assessment. You got to ask the right questions of what's in it for you, right? You got to put that user-centric approach in and put a survey out there, right? Put the questions out there that says, here's where we're going. Um, Tell me what your thoughts are on this. And let those different personas or individuals that you're working with look at that and sort of say, you know, what's in it for me? Here's what I expect. Here's what I need changed. And you're going to find some of the individuals that don't want the change, don't understand why we're doing this. And that's where you got to get the coaching in and you got to get the communication in as to here's the benefit of it. Here's why we're seeing this vision from the executive in your group who wants to see this executed and work its way down. If you're not familiar with this gift, it's from The Incredibles. And if your kids are going through any new math right now, this is basically me through every school year, essentially trying to figure out what happened to math. So um, I got to go through my own change at the same time.
You're giving me a real sense that a lot of readiness is not there from these, assessments. People aren't, there's a lot of feedback that they're not really ready.
Yeah, I would concur with that because there's a lot of organizations that have been doing something in a standard way for a long time, right? And I think one thing that we talked a little bit about is the changing demographic between employees, right? So we've got a lot of different influxes of ages coming in, and they work differently. And they're also learning new approaches, whether it's data science to software development cycles, from a university setting to a work setting. And a lot of the modernization pieces that we see today when we go through these transformations, it's adopting new approaches. And, it goes back to that, who moved my cheese concept, right? I've been doing this for a long time. It's been working. Why change it? Why now, right? So you have to articulate, here's why, here's what's going on. And it's been kind of enjoyable to see organizations who say, I don't know about this. And then when we get to the end of it, they're like, you have exceeded our expectations on where this was gonna go. Um, so it again, it takes a little patience from everybody. But yeah, you can't always expect everyone to be ready to do something different.
Sure. Thanks.
So step three is really just kind of creating a basic plan, right? What's your baseline plan? And we like to take in this again, it's kind of a generic thing, but it takes in some of the common pieces that we talk about. So creating a change team, getting leadership in place, right? Talking about who's going to be your key champions and communicators within the organization, getting communications all established and putting those in the right time frame so that people don't hear about things later on going, what did we do? They get to understand it's going to happen. Here's why it's going to happen. Here are the benefits that we think we're going to get out of it, and kind of building the you rah rah moment, right? So we all, if you go back to high school days, right, we all had spirit days and everything like that. It's the same concept, right? Let's get everyone excited about the big game, um, and go from there. Um, a really important set, right, is again, how do you build out that training, upskilling, and reskilling program? How do you put the right sort of pieces behind that and communicating when those things kick in? A lot of people we found, a lot of our clients get really eager, right? They're starting to see traction, they're starting to get interest, and they want to know when is it going to happen? What's next? What's next? What's next? And they try to push things a little bit early. And for us, we feel that they're going to get lost if we push it too early. And so you got to create the right sort of timeline of activities so that they're adopting it the correct way. And then again, it goes back to organizational alignment. How do you not only put this into strategic visions, but how do you work with organizational development moving forward? How do you work with business units? How do you work with HR? How do you redefine roles? Once you have some success and you start getting a taste of it and a bit better taste of it, you can start including that into essentially a bigger transformation program that you might have.
This seems pretty big for something that you talked about being core faster in 2 months.
Yeah. Well, all these things are flying in flight almost simultaneously. And it's a lot of moving parts. I think
Yep.
Stephanie can attest to that. She's been a part of like 10 of these things. And it's pretty nonstop and it goes very, very quickly. So again, and that's what I was trying to say before. You're throwing all this in there really quickly. And so you got to create this mindset and you got to kind of move beyond just we're deploying something to we're really putting something out there, right? It's beyond deployment. It's really adopting it and really changing things.
And that's probably where some of the success comes from. So, as Jarrell mentioned earlier, the technology piece, that's easy. I mean, let's be honest, you can spin up a Snowflake environment, a Synapse environment in days. You can ingest data in days. The part that's the ongoing piece that we're kind of really starting to see, and we as an organization are hitting on much earlier than we have, is that cultural aspect. All of us have faced it. If you look at the larger organizations, their IT staff typically has been around and in place, their management team on down, 20 plus years of service. So if you go to some of the larger Fortune 500 companies in the state of Wisconsin, IT management from mid-level up, 25 years in IT, SAP, traditional, that's all they know. And their developers are the same. So when you come in and you talk to them about you can do these things, you've got a couple things you're fighting is A, you got to prove it, because just because Jarrell said it doesn't make it true. But B, the developers are going to continually kind of pick away at, well, wait a minute, you did it this way, and now that you've shared this with me, you could do it that way. And all of us who have been through the development world, probably at one time in our careers, have inherited another developer's work. And all of us probably looked at it and went, well, if I would have done it, I would have done it this way. So with these tools, part of this cycle that's so fast, you've got that type of mentality you're addressing, and part of that coaching and mentoring of the leaders who are trying to drive this change, we work with them to say you have to acknowledge that resistance, but then you have to show them how that's a great thing. That these tools move so fast that they can apply some of their current knowledge and make anything that any consulting company does. They're like us, or you picking a consulting company, you come in, we do our job, we leave. And what we leave behind, they can then go, I'm going to make what you just did better. Or the next wave of data coming in, I'm going to do it my way. And without these tools, that never would have happened. And so I think, again, part of that coaching is working with those champions and saying where your teams may be scared of new technology, they may be fearful that it's not done the way that cross the T, dot the I that they do it. We try to pivot that and saying, do you realize everything that you've learned in 8 to 12 weeks? And I would take on any developer that's been in any organization for 20 years or more and say, in 8 weeks time span, have you ever learned and seen this much technology and capability in that short of window? And I would argue that most of them, not all of them, but most of them, will, if they're honest, will probably go, I've never seen that much change. I've never done that. And that's that communication. And as Jarrell said, it's the hardest part of the program because the business people are going to be like, oh, this is great. And as Jarrell mentioned, I got my report in days. They're going to be excited as heck. The IT community is the one where I think needs the most care, the most white glove, because they are the ones that are going through the shock because it's all new. People are bringing this in, the doors being busted down, and what a lot of organizations, which goes into communication engagement and change leadership, is nothing's being taken away from them. So what they're looking at is you're bringing them all this new technology, which they want to use, and if they're honest, they probably think it's kind of cool. But they got 25 years of processes that were built around an aging, archaic process that they're trying to shove into the new world. And in the meantime, they've got 1, 2, 3, 25 systems and reports they're trying to support. And none of that gets to go away day one. So when Jarrell was talking about ROI, one of the biggest mistakes and one of the reasons a lot of data analytics projects fail is because the finance focuses in on an ROI. I'm going to give you X, $100,000 to deploy this new technology because you told me Snowflake is going to save me money. And at the end of the year, what a financial person sees on a budget line is an increase. It is almost theoretically impossible to have a cost savings year one other than a soft cost savings. Because if you are a mature data warehouse environment, you don't have one or two little data sets you're moving. You have 15 data sources and 12 years of transformations, and you can't just jettison that in 8 weeks. And so we think some of the reasons those numbers are so high is because Nobody is laying out that plan to get the leadership to understand that the business is going to be excited, but behind that green curtain, it's controlled chaos. It is, you're looking at processes, you're looking at skill set, you are looking at people who, their job revolves around 20 years of specking, or 20 hours a week specking all this stuff and filling out all these forms. And here comes Pan Data Group, and we're like, oh, we can wipe all that away and do it in an hour. What is the first thing that comes to that person's mind? Holy crap, my whole week is going to get yeah. And so they start nitpicking at their expertise. So they start nitpicking at their data. It's human nature. And that's why that coaching and training is, we're giving you a new skill set. You put this on your resume, you're going to be more valuable. We're going to allow you to now use your brain of all this information, because I personally think a data team is the most underappreciated team in an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you, and even if you had one ERP system, so in my life I've had up to 26, but let's just say you have one ERP system. And in data warehouse, you got finance, logistics, quality, warranty, customer service. You've got 5, 6 functional areas of data feeding through that team, that team has to understand it. They're probably in the best position to help with process improvements throughout an organization. But yet, if you look at an IT department, a data and analytics department is typically the smallest department. And that's some of that cultural shift change where you're like, why do I have 5 developers for, and again, you could pick one, JD Edwards, SAP, Q, it doesn't matter. I got 15 developers over there and everybody thinks that's great. I'm running a BI team. I've got 3 and I need one more. And everybody's like, well, why do you need one more? You're just building a report. That's why for us, we are spending a lot more time up front working with the business champion to say, before we engage with you, let's talk about all these other branches. Let's, and if you want to, stretch it out, great. If you want to just ignore them, great. Our job is to make them as successful as they believe that they need to be. Our job is to kind of like point out all these places in the road and then work that plan collectively together to say, well, let's just avoid that one. Let's build the bridge over this one. This one, I'm going to split it right down the middle. I'll do part of it, but the rest of it we won't do. But when you do that, in Terrell's point, it becomes like that flywheel. It's like you're starting to build it. And again, is if you can set the stage that you don't bite off what you chew, and it's a battle with your internal team and it's a battle with your applications, meaning not so much your development applications team. I'm talking about the vendors.
Mhm.
The vendors with, most of them now, with a few exceptions, it's by person. So they're going to force you, well, you should go deploy it to 800 people. I mean, come on, we got to go. Snowflake is by consumption. So they're going to go, well, you got to get more use cases in there. You got to, we got to ramp this up. And they are going to continually push you to move faster than your organization is. And so we have to coach the leadership team to say, it must be done in a manner that you can absorb, but the pressures coming at you, they're going to be coming from the business wants more because they can see it faster. Finance isn't going to allow IT to buy or hire 20 new developers, and the people sitting in the middle are going to get caught going, I got to go do this process from 20 years ago for an SAP upgrade, and yet I got this new toy over here that says I can do it without doing any of that, and they're just like, help. and, and and they need that coaching and mentoring, and that's that change. And so um um
Thanks, Greg. I figured you'd have some good stuff. Now I'm going to tap both you and Jarrell during the round table for
yeah.
an example.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and we have a lot of them. And again, when you go through it and work it, when you get into the training and rescaling, and again, we have some wonderful stories about this tool, but it's the way you bring it to your existing IT member. And I'll hold that to the roundtable. So I apologize, Jarrell, for kind of going out. Obviously, I'm excited and passionate about making data I guess a strategy that sticks, because what I always ask a question, and as you guys do it and you look at it, if you go to a CIO and you see that one of the top 3 strategies of their strat plan is data and analytics. I always scratch my head and go, what's not getting done that it's a strategy every single year? I'm like, shouldn't you like maybe do something different? And if it's not, you kind of like scratch your head and go, well, what didn't you get done and why? So
No, I appreciate that, Greg, and thanks a lot. It's good. It's great to have Greg part of our team. And you talk about an individual that's been in the trenches. It's been Greg and Steph, right? So those two from Pandata Group's perspective have seen and been a part of a lot. The next two slides are really short and brief, right? And again, it's part of how we execute a lot of different things. And it's, again, the step forward. We've talked about the internal external communication piece of it, right? This is the how side of it all. And you get into the what. So this is where you kind of start looking at building the right sort of communication program and cater it to the users, to the community that you're talking to, whether they're at the executive side of things all the way down to the end user side of it. You got to change the messaging up a little bit to be respectful of who they are and what it means to them and how they're going to be doing things. So having just one blanket message isn't probably the way to go. Again, you got to take a look at being a little, human centered, and then changing that story as to the relevance to that kind of persona. So you start with the high level, here's what's happening, and then you work your way to the right with the reinforcement of it all, right? And it kind of goes in line with the project flow and what's happening and where you might be with that different stages, whether that's just simply saying, here's what we're doing, to training starts next week, to what did you like about training? How do we incorporate this a little bit more? We're going to have a hackathon next week, right? And getting that out there and then sending a, hey, guess what? Jeremiah won a 12-inch pizza because he did an amazing job figuring out this hackathon thing. So you build that sort of messaging out, right? And you talk about a job well done across the board with organizations as they grow. And, you introduce the supply chain to the marketing group, and marketing group to operational group, and what they're doing with data and analytics and how they're doing it differently. But to get to that reinforcement piece of it, right, that's that final end of it. And you really want to get into incorporating a baseline training strategy. And so we look at 4 different things. And a lot of that is encouraging self-study, right? Hopefully you're hiring people that, have the inquisitive aptitude to say, I want to understand and know more, right? That's you'll find that out really fast. Learning management systems are something that's increasingly becoming popular. We're putting together our own learning management system so that our clients can build in this change enablement piece into engagements with us. Some of them have learning management systems built in, and we kind of help put together the right sort of content for that, right? We ensure that we're incorporating the technology tools. We ensure that we're incorporating that end user role, because a lot of times we want to look at training finance independently, sales or marketing independently, operations independently, so that it relates to them and how they're going to do their job day in and day out. It does no one good from a finance perspective trying to understand what a sales individual would do to look at their market differently. It's just not going to help anybody. So we really make it focused on what that line of business is, or that business unit. We couple that with in-person instruction. Obviously, that's kind of historical, but someday we'll get back into it. We're going more towards the virtual instruction aspect of doing things live, right? And this is a blend of things. This is working with your technology partner that might have a training program or a customer success team related to it. It could be working with a group like Pandata Group or a different consulting partner that enhances the knowledge side of things with upskilling through more training. It could be something that you have all internally, where you have the right mindset, you have the tools in place, and you have someone that's building this sort of instructional piece internally. So there's just different ways to execute that and to create the same sort of concept of reinforcing the learning and keeping the communication going. So for us, really, at the end of the day, those are the 5 key steps that we take into place with change enablement.
And there's one other one that we can add to it that we kind of do internally as well, or started to do, and it's something that, as you guys go through your journey, it's something that I would encourage you to do with your teams. Every single engagement you do, there's something your team has learned. If you do an engagement survey with teams, most teams say they didn't learn anything because the organization didn't send them to a conference. Well, I didn't go to an SAP conference last year, so therefore I didn't learn anything. They view learning as going to conferences and going to training. But if you peel that back, what happens is 75% of people's learning, or even higher, is all on the job. So if you take a look at what you do every day right now, did you go to a training class that taught you that? Or did you have to figure it out and you backtracked it and all of a sudden you figured out how X became Y and then you told someone else and they told someone else? You didn't learn it in an SAP conference. Now, you might have learned that if you hit F2, the screen changes. And so what we're doing now is with every engagement, we encourage the people to sit down with everyone on their team, come up with a document, a simple little spreadsheet that says, this is the engagement, this is my role in the engagement, and this is what I learned. Now, most people will stop right there. We don't stop right there because that doesn't mean anything. We had one more column and it says, so what? So you did an engagement. Oh, look at this. I figured out how to do, whatever, a different type of T-SQL, something, something. Great. Okay, that's wonderful. You had learned it. So what? What does that mean? What do you as an individual do? And what happens is it enlightens your team. And again, it goes back to your skills and reassign it. It's enlightening your team that by bringing these technologies in, they're writing down what they're learning, and all you're doing is playing it back to them. But the so what becomes the most important part. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go back and have a meeting with Paul and share it with them. I'm going to file it away. I'm going to have at the next staff meeting, I'm going to do a 5-minute presentation for my entire staff on that. And then at the end of the year, when you talk about engagement, what I used to do is I would pull it up with my team, and part of like your performance measurement, you got training and development. I'd pull up their document that they created, that they added to, and we'd go through it and go, wow, you learned a ton this year. And it was a requirement for learning. So when you bring in these new technologies, I would encourage you to not let your team skate away and point fingers at each other, point fingers at the administration, the process, and the executive that they don't understand. Oh my God, how many times have all of us on this call ever heard, oh, you don't understand? And are pointed at a vendor. How many times do you bring in vendors and they do something and they leave, and then the team is like, oh yeah, well, those vendors, they didn't do their job or they didn't tell us whatever, and you throw them under the bus. But if you have this one line for every engagement, what did you learn? You can start taking that negative energy and start pivoting it, which is, as Jarrell mentioned earlier, it is that never ending, just coming back to you. What did you learn? Coming back to you. What did you learn? And going, oh my God, look at all the stuff you learned. And it's a great way. And then, Jarrell mentioned earlier, OD, tying into HR, tying into OD. Back in my day when I had staff like that, we literally were putting those in their HR files. So we were loading up what they learned in their HR file. So if they wanted to go to another job and nothing else, the potential hiring manager could go to HR, pull their file and go, oh my God, look at all the stuff they learned in the last year. This person has the capability of learning. And in a lot of cases, when you hire in technology, you use Synops, I use Snowflake, big whoop-de-doo-dah, they both jump over each other. But when I go down that list of everything you learn, you might pick the person who goes, this person can learn concepts, this person can learn how to do it. So I'm going to pick the person that fits my culture, that I know can learn. So I'm taking street smart over book smart. And there's a lot of value when you're building these new analytic teams to have that mentality and get that positive energy. Because IT, I think, sometimes gets bogged down with the negative energy because they've had 20 years of getting beat on. If IT has a problem and the report doesn't go, IT gets blamed. If Susie creates, and again, a click view report and it blows up and she's gone, where does it go? It doesn't go to anyone in that department. It comes back to IT, and IT has to scramble to solve world peace. A data warehouse in most organizations is not part of a DR plan. So technically, if it's not part of a DR plan, it is not a significant, important data set for the organization. But yet, if your feeds going into your data warehouse are off by an hour and your reports are late, you are going to get your tail handed to you. So IT historically has such a protective bubble everything is negative and everything is, not my fault and I didn't do it and you didn't listen. Start changing that culture of this is what you learned. These are new tools. God, you're getting smarter by the minute. Put it on your resume. This is awesome. Getting
Look
that
for the
buy-in.
yeah. Now, our audience has noted we'd love some examples. Move beyond theory. This is the roundtable part where we're like, okay, we need some
Well,
examples. And do you have a slide that reminds us of the steps while you're going through this example?
Terrell, you got a
Not really a
slide?
slide that reminds us of the steps, but
Okay. All right.
Um, I mean, I've got a couple that I can pull off, and I don't know if and Terrell will know who I'm talking about, so I'll leave it up to him if he wants to share the company name. But I've got two that we've done recently in the last year. So one of them was a small company on the south side of Milwaukee. They had a development staff of one. So they were like, oh my God. And they had been trying to do all this stuff over and over again. And this goes back to culture and training. So we spent the time, got to know the business champion. He came from a different company recently. So he had a good mindset. So he's like, I'm bringing this stuff into my organization. Help me out here. Talking to him about some of this stuff, he went off and picked like the business champion who happened to be in supply chain. So he was just a supply chain analyst guy, and they peeled off and picked off an IT person. One, that was our entire staff. But what we went through with this coaching and mentoring, and in our case for Pan Data Group, one of our differentiators on every project that we do, we have knowledge transfer sessions. Every company we work with, we train their team how we did something over and over, week after week after week. And by going through this, the business champion actually started talking to the upper executives of this cost thing. Like, well, you gave us all this money, but we're not going to get any money back. What we're going to get back is things we couldn't do. And now we're setting the foundation. The IT person by like, well, what did you learn? And what did you learn? And what did you learn? And reinforcing that positive energy and giving that person the forum to go, well, hey, Drell, um, I see what you did here is you kind of hard coded those values into this environment. Values are going to be changing. Why did you do that? That's I don't think I would have done it that way. So I'm not a happy customer. But coaching them through how we did it and coaching them through that they now learned a way to do it. They now have an opportunity to do it a different way. They're in that position. The long and short of it is after 8 weeks, by the time we were done, that developer was actually doing probably 85% of the development. It was just like that. And the business people had us back. We started doing presentations for their executives to do the next one. So by working and finding those key components and walking them through very slowly, not shoving it down their throat, but just getting a forum to like, well, why would you do it that way? They're like, oh, we got all these processes. And I'm like, well, what's the point of the process? Making them think that instead of being that robot for 20 years, they cross T's, dotted I's and saying, well, why did you do that? What was the purpose of that? Major
Paint me a
success.
paint me a picture what it looked like before their data culture before, like what that day or a week might have looked like in terms of their relationship with their data, and then what it looked like after.
The way that I would put it is before the developer would get an email or from a service now request that says go do that, that would get done and pushed back to the business. The business would say this isn't what I wanted. And that endless cycle of we don't like you, you don't understand, it's taking you too long, that cycle, we broke it. And so where they were not in meetings before, they were hiding behind emails, and I use that term very loosely, that broke down. And what was really interesting for me to watch, because nobody gives a rip about IT. I don't care what you have to go through. It doesn't matter. That's your problem. Just give me my damn data. The business actually started to go, oh, I didn't know it was that much. Oh, I didn't really. That's what because they were on the journey with us and in the car with us, they were starting to have more of an appreciation. So near the end of the project, when we would be like, oh, hey, person A, this is what you need to do. You got to put it in here. The business would be going, hey, wait a minute. Hey, Greg, hold on. Don't they have to do X, Y, and Z to get that done? There's no way they can get it done by Monday. And so the business started standing up to IT or standing up for IT, which was like, okay, that's a benefit I never saw coming. So that was one of them.
All right.
And another one is Another company that we worked with, like I mentioned, they had 3 ERP systems. They wanted to consolidate information and data. And again, this is like the art of the possible. Couldn't do it. The executives are like, our strategy is we are not migrating to a single ERP system. Total waste of time. Why would I invest millions and millions of dollars to bring you all together? You're never going to agree anyway. We're not doing that.
Mhm.
However, then they went to IT and said, hey, you guys got to figure out, I want one report. I want to see the whole world. And their IT team, again, they're just like, great people, wonderful people, but they were kind of lost like how to do these things. And so again, same type of stuff. We went in, Jarrell talked about an assessment. I talked to, 6 out of the 8 executives, sat down with them and just, what's the problem? What do you do? We broke all that down. And what was good is we kept the IT business champion had to attend every one of those. So they got to start hearing, well, why, Paul, why do you care about this? Well, they're our number one customer. And the IT guy, I'm like, did you know that? And the IT guy, I didn't know they're number one customer. And so you start pushing that back into IT.
Sure.
And then you start culture shifting them. And so their team, naysayers. One of the guys was like, this ain't going to work. This is terrible. You could just feel it. Every meeting we were in, it was just, I don't have time for you guys. This is the way we do it. And again, you don't understand.
Great comment from the chat. To summarize, it sounds like Pandata tries to foster self-learning organizations. Is that a fair assessment?
Jarrell, I would say yes, it is, because we want to leave a legacy behind that they are better because we were there. And if anyone that, at least in my opinion, and this is just a Greganism, if every engagement we have, if there's one thing that I would say I want to leave as a legacy is that organization, they may argue about politics and money, cost, budget, you name it, but if they say, you know what, we're better since Pandata's been here. We might not have liked the attitude, the cost, the bill, the invoice, or how they went about their project planning, but yeah, we're better. I'm going to call every engagement a success.
We definitely try to incorporate co-development, right? To the point where if we have multiple use cases and an organization isn't ready to adopt something on their own, right? We'll kind of force the hand of, okay, by the third use case you're developing, we're looking over your shoulder just to make sure you're getting it. And, either it's our exit out of the organization, but we've had a lot of success with them, or, which is what we find today, we built a really good partnership and we're just brought in for other initiatives at that point. But the idea is that they're definitely doing some self-learning and that they were able to understand what's going on by themselves and not rely so much on us. Otherwise, what fun is that?
Nice.
It's not what we want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Drill and I always fight because my always comment is I want to work us out of a job with these organizations on a good reason, not a bad one. But it's like if I can get them self-taught, self-learned, and they're off to the races, technically, they don't need us hardly anymore.
Nice.
But it's a great way to go. Great way to work with clients and getting them going. And it's exciting to watch. That's my thing. It's like a kid, and you're like, oh my God, he knows how to ride a bike now. This is cool.
Nice. All right, group. This is the round table. Any more questions or thoughts? This is the time to unmute. Let's start getting those webcams on because we're going to fold into or even our more networking because we can't get back in person. We got to see each other. Anyone? Thoughts that occurred to you? Questions you want this round table to think about? There we go. We're getting some more cameras on. Excellent. Anyone have any other roundtable thoughts on this and the process, change enablement, building self-learning organizations?
I'll just throw out a comment to Greg or Jarrell. How do you see based on the work you've done with your clients and so on, look in your crystal ball and how do you see companies you work for and similar ones being 5 to 10 years? In other words, is this a trend that's moving forward where people in companies are going to be more open to change and learning and self-reliant, or the opposite? In other words, how do you predict the future of companies and change management?
Yeah, basically the answer is yes. I think all companies are going to be heading that way irregardless. It'll happen around them even if it's not a strategy. The number one reason why I think is just I hate to say it, but for me, I'm 5 years away from retirement. I'm not going to be around, so it's kind of like the age of the people running these organizations is going to slowly retire, which means the new wave of I need my data now. I got my iPhone. Why do I have that self-service desire is going to exponentially grow as the workforce keeps shifting. And then the flip side of the case, but there's a downside. The number one thing I think people are missing right now through this, and this goes back to the culture, people underestimate the complexity of data. So everybody says, I want it, get the heck out of my way. And you go, okay, here's a nice data lake. Go have a blast. Give them a week and you will have two things happen. You'll have controlled chaos because you'll have stuff coming out of everywhere and nobody's going to know what it is. And then what's going to happen is those end users are going to be so frustrated, they're going to come back to IT and say, just build me my report. Forget it. So you're going to have to balance I got to build this self-service up because it's coming, but I got to balance that with the governance process and culture that says, well, hey, Justin, before you can get in, you got to get certified on what this data is all about. And if you think I'm all wet, this is the easiest one to do in any organization. Walk into HR and ask them one simple question. What is a promotion? Because they have to do promotional reporting every single month. I'll guarantee you your organization does that, and I will guarantee you that there's a human being taking whatever data set you have and building all kinds of well, Paul got a new title, but that wasn't a promotion. But Susie, yeah, no, Susie, there isn't a flag because human beings are involved in that. And that's where that governance versus self-service is going to, whatever company can master that, and I don't have the answer, but I'm going to tell you, whoever can master self-service versus governance data literacy, those are the companies that are going to explode because they will have an army of data analysts just ripping through everything, and they're going to shorten market time, cycle time, marketing time. Everything's going to spin faster because they will be armed with not 10 analysts, 100. But that magic sauce is how do I give it to them, but they give them the knowledge of what it is, and that's the magic sauce in my opinion.
Nice, thanks. David, how does this relate to the education that goes into those that are trying to work with data? It's all about change enablement, not about the data science, it seems like. What do you think? You got to unmute.
That's part of my change management. I'm listening to this. It's interesting. I mean, there's so many different angles, and I actually worked at Kimberly-Clark for 27 years. I was more on the business side. I was a marketing director, so I was as a business consumer of data and analytics and a lot of Nielsen work and things like that. So that's kind of where and then I got more into the data analytics programs through education. I went to Northwestern School of Professional Studies where I did their predictive analytics course, and that's where, and it's partly because I felt I needed as a even though I was a director and I wasn't ever expected to be a programmer or even more of a data engineer, I needed to have the language, right? So I needed to get that literacy up a whole nother level beyond what I had gotten already through my career at Kimberly-Clark. So, at that point, I also decided that it was nice that there's time to go. So I went and became a professor at Oshkosh instead. And now I'm back into the process because I'm now the data director of this certificate. So kind of a lean background just because you guys don't know me, what I'm about to say. But there's two things I'm kind of interested in learning is one of the things I learned when I was in there, but also through conferences and stuff, is there is a kind of a time frame of how much change an organization can absorb. And I've seen maturity models and things like that to kind of say, you go from level 1 to level 2 in some process like pricing, which is what my focus was on. You need about 2 years. It's like you get a project, you get the data, you do things wrong, you get the training program, you get the change management in place, and then that gets you from level 1 to level 2, and then you go from level 2 to level 3, and that's another 2 years. So I think there's an idea of getting the organization kind of understanding what is a reasonable pace of change, and that's a hard thing to do. It's easy to say that, but that's something I think that's important. The other thing I think I've learned from getting involved in projects within Kimberly-Clark, but also subsequently as a teacher and seeing more companies now, other than just my own, is that data analytic projects, you need to start out simple because you jump into the deep end right away, you're going to drown. So there's this idea. I think for me, there's a change management is how do you get the business to tolerate or to have patience to say, hey, this new forecasting system may not work right out of the bat, but we will get better at it. That's almost the nature of data modeling, right? You start out with something that works, kind of like may not work as well as it did, but you're in the step with managing patients. And if people, since you have a lot of consultants and stuff here, is I have some students for next year, and I'm actually interested in kind of providing advice on this. Because I worked for a huge company, and we had IT teams, we have data engineers, data scientists. What about smaller companies don't have those army of people? How are they supposed to manage this? And so I guess when I come back to just for the group, two questions. One is how do you manage expectations of rate of change? And then how is what you're talking about really applicable to small companies? Like I have one student who's like a department of 2, and they realize that, hey, they got to do something here. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I coach her and tell her what's reasonable for her to expect to be able to do at the end of the program that she could take back to her company? So just interested in both those comments.
Yeah, good questions. What do you got, Jarrell? Greg?
Sure. So let's start with the small business aspect of things, because a lot of our customers are actually in the mid-market space, right? So they're not enterprise level, but they're also not, smaller organizations. But what we like about the cloud is the fact that you get to take out several different factors associated with having a data and analytics environment with the cloud. So a small business has the opportunity to actually take advantage of analytics. That's all the processing power behind everything, right? So the focus on an individual is really about building an expertise around data modeling, right? So if you look at older teams or past teams, right, you had to find someone that was a storage specialist, a server specialist, someone that would take into consideration everything that had to go into the amount of data collected on premise and things like that. Cloud kind of changes that up, where you can basically work with someone that has an expertise around data modeling. How do you collaborate? How do you basically engage the business so that they are part of that forecasting data model from day one? It's one of the ways that we like to exercise with our clients, is basically bringing them into what we call a business dimensional model exercise. And, it basically is a different way of getting into post-operational analytics by bringing in the business and really creating a data catalog on the fly and working with the business so that they own it more than IT typically owns it. And when I say that, I was introduced to the business dimensional model 6 years ago, okay? And you think it sounds elementary, like everyone does that. But I can tell you that going into several different Wisconsin companies just, years ago, they were like, no one's worked on an exercise like that with us before. It's a different approach, and it requires a straight 50-50 collaboration between what you have in IT and who you have in the business. So, it allows a smaller organization to focus more on the basics of data modeling and the front end tool sets of things, right? Data modeling is imperative. You got to have that. But some of these tools, like you have a lot built into Power BI, you have a lot built into SciSense that allow forecasting to happen a little bit easier, for example. So if you can help integrate those things in a cost-effective manner for a smaller business, you'd be surprised with the results that you can get. Greg, am I wrong on any of those points?
No, that's like I said, that's the easier one to address, because these tools allow smaller shops to do more with less, which is a buzz phrase that's been around for years. But the one thing that you talked about is how do you control the reins on expectation for change? That
That's a tough one.
Because once executives can see and go, oh, you can do this. Oh, hey, you got new data. Oh, they the floodgates just open, and that's when a lot of these people, specifically in small shops, can get buried because the expectation and demand far outweighs what they're capable of doing. And it goes back to, I'm going to circle all the way back to that education piece we talked about in collaboration, is continually working with the executives of organizations of what legacy they're leaving behind. If you look at an organization other than the CIO, if you look at the vice president of sales, vice president of marketing, president, none of those people typically, and I use that word typically, came out of IT. They don't know anything about it. They don't understand it. They just know I go down there, my phone works, my computer works, and that's all I know. They have no clue. And because of that fact, to help set the expectation, you've got to get a hold and wrangle those people in some way, shape, or form. And it is easier said than done. And help them understand what it takes to like ingest 3 billion records out of some website on, whatever point of sale from some client. They don't want to give you the time. Their attention span is like non-existent for that type of stuff because to them it is foreign, it is boring. But somehow you have to, and I used to collaborate with the OD director to get audience with it and just keep sprinkling that idea of what it takes for expectation and building the credibility. Because otherwise, if you don't invest in that education, they're going to keep running around and you're going to say it'll take 2 weeks. And the first question, I mean, again, you guys have all sat at the table. IT comes to the table and you say to do X, and I don't care if anything, implementation of anything, any way, shape, or form, and you lay it out and you go 10 days. And I would venture to guess that everybody on this phone, the first question out of any executive's mouth was, well, why can't you do it in 5? Why can't you do it in 7? Why can't you do it? And you don't have anybody at that table to support you, to back you, to say, Paul, you've been doing this for 25 years. So if you said 10 days, by God, we're going to give you 10 days and you better not make it 11. And that's where you got to go to those executives. And it is the most frustrating part because they're impatient. They don't have the time. They look at you at times as you're a cost center. But you got to keep showing that the value you're bringing is worth their time to understand to a little bit of what it takes, because they spend the time with the engineering community about a new product. They spend the time with the marketing community about what their rollout plan is. And when I give you $250,000 for some trade show and you're going to do all your lead generation, they want to know all about that. But they don't seem to want to know about the IT to get all that data to do all of that. And so I would only encourage you to somehow get to those, and I like directors and above for argument's sake, because if you can get them to understand, they can give you the air cover on the ones below it. So you will know you have crossed the bridge when you're sitting in a meeting and you say 10 days and the VP of operations says, I need it in 5. And your president says, no, Paul said 10. We're giving Paul 10. When you can get that to happen, I would argue you have crossed that bridge for successful expectations. And now you can start driving that journey. You talked about 2 years. They will better understand it. You can lay it into place. They will support your, hey guys, it's a 2-year plan. Give me my 2 years to get us to this point. And that would be my only advice. And again, I have tried and failed and tried and succeeded. And it's you just got to be resilient to just keep sprinkling that knowledge.
So did they answer the question, David, or sidestep it?
I think it kind of goes back to actually the point of the presentation overall, is that you started out with, is that the IT part is the part of the change cycle. The bigger one is actually getting the users to how they change and integrate that into their behavior and decision making. And that's where the years often come in. So I think that one resonated with me. A lot of the other comments in the presentation also resonated in terms of, I led a change management project thing at Kimberly-Clark, And I had a change manager full time. I had a project manager from IT forward me from IT to help me manage that part. I had a business liaison from IT also helping me, which so those things were critical to success of the project. But I had a lot of people who were conversant, who could talk the other language, and I think that was a key element of the success of the project. So that resonated with me. So there's a lot of things that were talked about that were true at a business unit level, but they're also true at the IT level. But it's really is this idea of how do you get the IT integrated in with the business processes that really is one of the big challenges. And communication is the key thing.
Nice. Excellent. So now we're getting even more informal because we're going to start wrapping up and thanking everybody and that kind of thing. So you can stop the recording, Nicole, because I'm going to be asking Jarrell where my beer is because I saw him drinking his.